I always thought my life was perfect, married to a loving husband, surrounded by good friends, and living a comfortable life. But perfection has its cracks, and mine began to show when I met Lily, the wife of my husband's best friend, James. Lily was captivating in a way I couldn't explain. Her laughter was infectious, her confidence magnetic. At first, our interactions were innocent shared stories at dinner parties, casual chats over wine. But there was an unspoken tension between us, a pull I had never felt before. One evening, as the four of us played a board game, Lily's hand brushed against mine under the table. The spark was undeniable. I glanced at her, and she smiled, her eyes holding mine a second too long. My heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Her smile, her touch, her presence lingered in my mind. One afternoon, Lily invited me over for coffee while our husbands were at work. Just a casual catch-up, she said, her tone light. I hesitated but agreed, curiosity and excitement swirling within me. Her home was warm and inviting, much like her. As we sipped our coffee, the conversation flowed effortlessly. I feel like I can talk to you about anything, she said, her voice softer now. There's something different about you, something I can't ignore. My cheeks flushed as I looked away. I feel the same, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The room grew quiet, the air thick with tension. Then she reached out and touched my hand, her fingers warm against mine. Is this crazy? She asked, her eyes searching mine for an answer. Maybe, I replied, a nervous smile forming on my lips. But it feels right. In that moment, the line between right and wrong blurred, and I found myself leaning closer to her. Her lips met mine, and the world seemed to fade away. It was electric, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. When we pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine. What does this mean? She whispered. I don't know, I replied honestly, but I don't want it to stop. Over the following weeks, Lily and I found excuses to see each other. Coffee turned into long walks, stolen glances, and hidden touches. Every moment with her felt like an escape from reality, a world where only we existed. But with every secret meeting, the guilt grew. I avoided my husband David more and more, unable to face him without feeling the weight of my betrayal. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, David noticed my silence. You've been distant lately, he said, his tone concerned. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired from everything at work. He nodded, but didn't seem convinced. If something's bothering you, you can tell me, he said softly. His kindness only deepened my guilt. I know, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. That night, as David slept beside me, I lay awake, replaying every choice I had made. The next day, Lily and I met at a quiet cafe. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice trembling. Her eyes filled with sadness as she reached for my hand. I know, she whispered, but I can't stop thinking about you. Neither can I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. But what we're doing is wrong. We're hurting the people we love. Lily nodded, her hand tightening around mine. What do we do then? I don't know, I said honestly, but we need to figure it out before it's too late. We sat in silence, the weight of our situation hanging heavily between us. Later that week, James invited David and me over for dinner. The thought of sitting across from Lily, pretending everything was normal, terrified me. During dinner, Lily's gaze met mine several times, her eyes full of unspoken emotions. My heart raced with every glance. James and David laughed, completely oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. After dinner, Lily found me alone in the kitchen. We need to talk, she said, her voice low. This isn't the time, I replied, glancing nervously toward the living room. When is the time then? She asked, her tone desperate. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. The tension in the kitchen was palpable. Before I could respond, James walked in, holding an empty glass. Am I interrupting something? He asked with a playful grin, oblivious to the charged atmosphere between Lily and me. No, not at all, I replied quickly, forcing a smile as I turned back to the sink. Lily stepped away, her expression neutral, but her eyes revealing the turmoil beneath. I'll grab dessert, she said, leaving the room. For the rest of the evening, I avoided being alone with her, but every glance she sent my way reminded me of the mess we were in. On the drive home, David mentioned how happy he was to spend time with James and Lily. They're like family, he said, smiling warmly. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Guilt churned in my stomach, and I stared out the window, unable to respond. The next morning, I received a message from Lily. We need to stop. This isn't fair to them or to us. Her words echoed my own fears. I typed a reply. You're right. We need to end this before it destroys everything. For weeks, we avoided each other. I focused on repairing my marriage, pouring my energy into rekindling the connection with David. But no matter how hard I tried, Lily's absence was a constant ache, a reminder of the emotions I had tried to suppress. One evening, as David and I sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me. You've been different lately, he said, his voice soft. I hesitated, the truth threatening to spill out. I'm just trying to be better, I said finally, my voice trembling. David smiled, pulling me into a hug. You're already enough, he said, his words cutting through my guilt like a knife. That night, I realized that ending things with Lily was the right choice, but it didn't make the process any less painful. The following weekend, James and Lily invited us over again. I dreaded the idea of facing her, but I couldn't avoid it forever. When we arrived, Lily greeted me with a polite smile. Hi, Claire, she said, her tone calm but distant. Hi, I replied, forcing myself to keep my composure. The evening felt like a test of my resolve. As the night wore on, I noticed how easily Lily interacted with everyone else, as though nothing had ever happened. For the first time, I realized that while I was still holding on to the past, she had already begun to move on. Watching Lily so composed made me question my own emotions. Was I clinging to something that was already over? That night, as David and I drove home, he talked about how much he enjoyed the evening. It's nice to have friends like them, he said warmly. I nodded, forcing a smile. Inside, I felt like a storm was raging, my guilt and confusion battling for control. The following week, I decided to focus on myself. I started journaling, hoping to make sense of my emotions and choices. Writing down my thoughts was painful but cathartic. For the first time, I confronted the truths I had been avoiding. One afternoon, I came across an old photo of David and me on our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so carefree. Tears filled my eyes as I realized how far we had drifted. I wanted to get back to that place, to the love we once shared. I planned a weekend getaway for just the two of us, something spontaneous and special. David was thrilled by the idea. As we walked along the beach during our trip, David took my hand. This was a great idea, he said, his smile genuine. I want us to be closer, I said, my voice trembling. I know I haven't been the best partner lately. David stopped walking and turned to face me. You're trying, Claire. That's what matters, he said, pulling me into a hug. His forgiveness was both a relief and a weight. It reminded me that while I could try to repair our relationship, the scars of my choices would remain. Back home, I resolved to be honest with myself. Lily had been a chapter in my life, but she wasn't my story. I poured my energy into rebuilding trust with David, making small gestures that showed him how much he meant to me. One evening, as we sat on the couch, David said, I feel like we're finally in a good place again. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. So do I replied, meaning every word. Months later, Lily and James announced they were moving away for James' new job. Their farewell dinner was bittersweet. As Lily hugged me goodbye, she whispered, Take care, Claire. Her words carried no resentment, only a quiet understanding. I watched her leave, feeling a mix of relief and closure. Her absence marked the end of a turbulent chapter in my life. As David and I walked home that night, I held his hand tightly, grateful for the second chance we had found together. The weeks after Lily and James moved away felt like a new beginning. Without the constant reminder of my past, I could finally focus on healing. David and I began spending more quality time together, weekend hikes, quiet dinners, and even joining a couple's yoga class. One afternoon, as we sorted through old photo albums, David pulled out a picture of us from our first date. "You look so nervous here," he teased, pointing at my shy smile in the photo. I admitted with a laugh. "I didn't think you'd actually call me back after that date." "Well, I'm glad I did," he said, his tone softening. "It was the best decision I ever made." His words brought tears to my eyes. I realized how much I had taken for granted in our relationship and how lucky I was to have him. As time passed, the wounds of the past began to fade. They didn't disappear entirely, but they became lessons, reminders of what we had overcome. David and I began talking about the future again, something we hadn't done in years. We dreamed of traveling, building a new life, and maybe even starting a family. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, David turned to me. "I want you to know how proud I am of us," he said. "Proud?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. "We've been through so much, but we didn't let it break us. That takes strength." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "It's because of you, David. You never gave up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Because I believe in us," he replied simply, his voice steady. That night, as we sat under the stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The past was a part of me, but it didn't define me. What mattered was the present, the life I was building with David. And as we planned for the future, I knew one thing for certain: love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other every single day. Our story wasn't without its scars, but those scars made us stronger. And that, I realized, was the beauty of love. As the seasons changed, so did our relationship. We grew closer, learning to appreciate the little things we once overlooked. One spring morning, David surprised me with a picnic in the park where we had our first date. "You remember this spot?" he asked, spreading out the blanket beneath a large oak tree. "How could I forget?" I said, smiling as memories of that day came flooding back. He handed me a small box, his expression nervous yet hopeful. "I wanted to give you something," he said. Inside was a delicate bracelet with a charm shaped like a heart. "For us," he said softly, "to remind us of what we've built together." Tears welled up in my eyes as I fastened it around my wrist. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Thank you, David." That day marked a turning point for me. I realized that I wasn't just rebuilding my marriage, I was rediscovering myself. I started pursuing hobbies I had once loved but abandoned, like painting and gardening. David encouraged me every step of the way. One evening, as I worked on a canvas in our living room, David watched from the couch. "You're amazing at this," he said, his admiration clear. His support meant everything to me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly confident in who I was. Our life became filled with laughter, shared dreams, and quiet moments of contentment. We started traveling more, exploring places we had always dreamed of visiting. Each trip felt like a celebration of the love we had reclaimed. During a trip to Italy, as we strolled through the cobblestone streets of Florence, David took my hand. "I feel like we're living a dream," he said. "So do I replied, my heart swelling with gratitude. "And I never want to wake up." Back home, our life felt richer and fuller than ever before. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined us. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our porch, David turned to me. "I'm glad we never gave up," he said, his voice steady. "Me too," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It's not about the mistakes we make, it's about how we move forward from them." Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And in every imperfection, we found strength, love, and hope. As the stars filled the night sky, I realized that life's greatest beauty lies not in avoiding brokenness, but in piecing it back together, stronger than before. As time passed, our home became a gathering place for friends and family, filled with warmth, laughter, and love. One evening, while hosting a dinner party, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. James and Lily's absence no longer felt like a shadow over my life. Instead, it felt like a chapter that had finally been closed. David raised his glass for a toast to love, resilience, and the people who make life worth living, he said, his eyes locking with mine. The room erupted in cheers, but all I could focus on was the gratitude I felt for the man sitting beside me. After the guests left, David and I sat on the porch, sipping wine under the stars. "You've changed," he said suddenly, his tone thoughtful. "Changed?" I asked, tilting my head. "In the best way," he replied, smiling. "You've grown into someone even stronger, someone who inspires me every day." His words warmed my heart. "I wouldn't be here without you, David. You taught me what love truly means." He leaned closer, his voice soft. "Love means sticking together, even when it's hard. And we're proof of that." As the years went by, we continued to build a life rooted in forgiveness, growth, and unwavering commitment. Our children grew up, each carving their own path, and eventually we became grandparents, a role that brought us endless joy. One summer afternoon, as our grandchildren played in the garden, David turned to me. His smile was warm as ever. "We've lived a beautiful life, haven't we?" he asked, his tone filled with pride. I nodded, tears glistening in my eyes. "We really have," I replied, my voice steady with gratitude. That evening, as the sun set on another perfect day, I realized that life's imperfections were what made it truly beautiful. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it was ours. And that, I knew, was what mattered most. Because love isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about facing it, learning from it, and choosing each other every single day. As we held hands under the starlit sky, I knew our love had endured every test and emerged stronger. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and unwavering love. And as the years passed, I carried with me the lessons of the past and the promise of a future built on trust and hope.